The desert wind carried sand across the broken roads of Kandahar as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison crouched behind a crumbling wall. His team of Navy SEALs had their weapons trained on the compound ahead. Intelligence reports indicated a high-value target was inside, someone who had orchestrated attacks on coalition forces for months. The mission was supposed to be quick and clean. Get in, secure the target, get out. But nothing in Afghanistan ever went according to plan. Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead despite the cool evening air. His team had been tracking this target for 3 weeks, moving through villages and desert terrain, always one step behind. Tonight was different. They had solid intel, a reliable source, and the element of surprise. Through his night vision goggles, he watched the compound. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, their movements lazy and predictable. The main building was a 2-story structure with thick mud walls, typical of the region. Echo 1, this is Echo 3. We have eyes on the east entrance, whispered Sergeant Mike Chen through the radio. His voice was steady, professional. Mike had been with Jake for 4 years, through countless operations. They understood each other without words. Copy that, Echo 3. Echo 2 status, Jake asked. West side clear. No movement, responded Corporal Danny Rodriguez. He was the youngest member of the team but had proven himself reliable in the most difficult situations. Jake gave the signal. His team moved like shadows through the darkness, closing in on the compound from 3 sides. They had rehearsed this operation a dozen times. Everyone knew their role, their position, their backup plan. The guards never saw them coming. Within seconds, both sentries were neutralized and zip-tied, lying face down in the dirt. The team stacked up at the main entrance. Jake tested the door handle, unlocked. That should have been the first warning sign, but adrenaline was pumping and they were committed. He pushed the door open slowly and they flowed inside like water, clearing each room with practiced efficiency. The ground floor was empty, furniture covered in dust, cooking pots abandoned, no signs of recent activity. Something's wrong, Mike whispered. His instincts were rarely off target. Jake felt it too. The intelligence had been too good, too specific. They moved up the stairs, weapons ready. The second floor was a long hallway with 4 doors. They cleared the first 3 rooms, empty. The last door at the end of the hall was closed. Jake approached carefully, his team covering him from multiple angles. He kicked the door open and swept inside. The room was bare except for a single chair in the center. On the chair sat a sat phone and a handwritten note in English. Jake picked up the note with his gloved hand. It read, "You are always too late, Commander Morrison. But thank you for coming. You have made my evening interesting." "It's a trap," Jake said, but his words were drowned out by an explosion that shook the building. The blast came from somewhere below them. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. The structure groaned, and Jake heard the unmistakable sound of walls beginning to collapse. "Out! Everyone out now," he shouted into his radio. His team rushed toward the stairs, but another explosion rocked the building. This one was closer, maybe on the first floor. The stairwell filled with smoke and flames. They were trapped on the second floor of a collapsing building. Jake's mind raced through options. The windows were too high to jump without serious injury. The smoke was getting thicker, making it hard to breathe even through their tactical masks. "Rope! We need to use the fast rope," Danny shouted, pulling emergency rappelling line from his pack. They secured the rope to a support beam that still looked stable and kicked out a window. One by one, they descended the side of the building as it continued to shake and crumble. Jake went last, making sure his entire team was clear. His boots had just touched the ground when the second floor collapsed inward with a thunderous crash. "Everyone okay?" "Sound off," Jake commanded as they gathered in the courtyard, coughing and covered in dust. His team responded one by one. Everyone had made it out. No serious injuries. But their extraction helicopter was still 15 minutes away, and whoever had set this trap knew they were here. Jake scanned the darkness beyond the compound walls. They were sitting ducks in an open courtyard, and the explosion would have alerted every hostile in the area to their location. "Form a perimeter. We hold this position until extraction arrives," Jake ordered. His team spread out, taking defensive positions behind whatever cover they could find. The minutes crawled by like hours. Then they heard it. The sound of vehicles approaching fast. 3 trucks, maybe 4, coming from the north. Jake raised his rifle, finger on the trigger, eyes focused on the gate. The lead truck burst through the compound gate, and Jake was about to give the order to fire when something made him hesitate. The driver of the truck was a woman, not wearing any military gear or tactical vest, just ordinary clothes covered in dust. She was alone in the vehicle, hands visible on the steering wheel, no weapons apparent. The truck skidded to a stop 20 feet from their position. "Hold fire! Hold fire!" Jake shouted, though every instinct screamed at him that this was wrong. The woman stepped out of the truck slowly, her hands raised above her head. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her face was covered in dirt and what looked like blood. She walked toward them with steady steps, not showing any fear despite having 5 rifles pointed directly at her chest. "Commander Morrison?" she called out in perfect English with an American accent. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm an American citizen and I desperately need your help. There are children dying in a village 5 miles from here, and you're the only ones who can save them." Jake's mind struggled to process what was happening. How did she know his name? How did she know they would be here? And why would any American civilian be in this area, in the middle of the night in one of the most dangerous provinces in Afghanistan? He kept his weapon raised, his team maintaining their defensive positions. Every training scenario, every operational procedure told him this was a trap. Nobody just appeared out of nowhere in a war zone with perfect timing and perfect information. "I know this looks suspicious," Sarah continued, taking another step forward despite the weapons aimed at her. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm a pediatric surgeon and there's a measles outbreak in a refugee camp. Without medical intervention in the next few hours, at least 20 children will die. I had transportation, but my convoy was attacked. I lost my team, my supplies, everything. You're my last hope." Jake's finger remained on the trigger, but doubt crept into his mind. Her story could be legitimate. Medical workers did operate in these areas, often taking insane risks to help civilians. But the timing was too convenient. The explosion, the ambush setup, and now this woman appearing exactly when they were vulnerable and waiting for extraction. It had all the hallmarks of a sophisticated trap, designed to exploit their training and their humanity. Behind Sarah, the sound of more vehicles grew louder, and this time there was no mistaking the hostile intent. Gunfire erupted from the darkness beyond the compound walls. Bullets slammed into the compound walls, sending chips of mud brick flying in every direction. Jake made a split-second decision that could either save lives or get his entire team killed. He grabbed Sarah by the arm and pulled her behind the cover of an abandoned water tank. His team immediately shifted their defensive positions, returning fire toward the muzzle flashes in the darkness. The incoming fire was intense and organized, nothing like the scattered attacks from untrained insurgents. "Get down and stay down," Jake ordered Sarah, pushing her flat against the ground behind the tank. He keyed his radio. "Echo 3, what do we have?" "Multiple hostiles, at least 20 combatants approaching from north and east sectors," Mike responded between controlled bursts from his rifle. "They're trying to flank us, Commander." Sarah lifted her head slightly and Jake pushed it back down. "I said stay down." "Those trucks behind me," she shouted over the gunfire. "There's medical equipment in the back. If we survive this, you'll see I'm telling the truth." Jake didn't have time to verify her story. The enemy was pressing their attack, using coordinated fire and movement tactics that suggested professional training. These weren't random fighters. They were organized, probably the same group that had lured his team here in the first place. The question burning in Jake's mind was whether Sarah was part of their plan or an innocent bystander caught in the chaos. "Echo 2, throw smoke and prepare to displace," Jake commanded. "We can't hold this position. Too exposed." Danny launched 2 smoke grenades that exploded in purple clouds, providing temporary concealment. The team began a tactical withdrawal toward a more defensible position in the northeast corner of the compound, where partial walls would provide better cover. Jake grabbed Sarah's arm again and half-dragged, half-carried her through the smoke. She didn't resist, moving quickly and keeping low. They reached the new position just as the enemy fire intensified. The hostiles had figured out the displacement and were adjusting their attack. Jake could hear them shouting commands to each other in Pashto, coordinating their movements. His extraction helicopter was still 8 minutes out. 8 minutes might as well be 8 hours in this situation. "Contact left," shouted Rodriguez, engaging new targets that had emerged from behind a storage building. The firefight became a desperate holding action. Jake's team had superior training and equipment, but they were outnumbered and pinned down. Every SEAL was burning through ammunition at an unsustainable rate. Jake fired controlled bursts, each shot carefully aimed, taking down targets while conserving ammunition. Beside him, Sarah stayed pressed against the wall, her face pale but her eyes sharp and alert. "You still think I'm with them?" she asked during a brief lull in the firing. "Jury's still out," Jake replied, reloading his rifle. "You show up at exactly the wrong time with exactly the wrong story. That's either incredible bad luck or incredibly good planning on someone's part." "My convoy was attacked 6 hours ago," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "They killed my driver and my nurse. I barely escaped in one of the trucks. I've been driving through the desert trying to find help. I picked up radio chatter about an American military operation in this area. I took a chance that you might be here. How did you know my name?" Jake asked, dropping 2 more targets who were trying to rush their position. "I didn't. I guessed rank from your gear and tactics. Morrison is a common name. I took a shot in the dark." Jake wanted to believe her. His gut told him she was genuine, but his training screamed caution. He had seen enemy forces use women and children as weapons, knowing American soldiers would hesitate. He had watched good men die because they showed mercy at the wrong moment. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford in combat. "Echo 1, this is Raptor 6, his radio crackled. The extraction helicopter was checking in. "We're 3 minutes out. Hot LZ. We'll need you to mark your position and suppress enemy fire for dust-off." "Roger, Raptor 6. Be advised, we have 1 civilian, American national. We'll need space for 6 total," Jake responded. There was a pause on the radio. "Confirmed civilian status?" "Not confirmed. Taking her with us regardless. She's either a hostage, a witness, or a very unlucky doctor," Jake said, glancing at Sarah. Mike tossed an infrared strobe into the center of the courtyard to mark their position for the helicopter. The incoming fire had momentarily decreased as the enemy forces repositioned. Jake knew what was coming next. They would launch a final assault, trying to overrun the position before the helicopter arrived. It was the tactically sound move, and these fighters had proven they understood tactics. "Here they come," Danny shouted. The enemy forces charged from 3 directions simultaneously, at least 15 fighters visible in the moonlight. Jake's team opened up with everything they had, creating an overwhelming wall of fire. The M249 light machine gun that Corporal Jason Torres had been saving roared to life, cutting down the first wave of attackers. Bodies fell, but more kept coming. These men were willing to die to prevent the Americans from escaping. Sarah suddenly stood up and Jake reached to pull her down, but she moved to the medical truck she had driven into the compound. She threw open the back doors and started pulling out equipment. Jake's eyes widened. The truck was indeed filled with medical supplies. Bandages, medicine, portable surgical equipment, all marked with International Aid Organization logos. "I told you," Sarah shouted. "I'm not lying." But there was no time to process this information. The helicopter's rotors announced its arrival, and the pilot brought the bird in fast and low, flaring hard in the courtyard. The door gunner opened up with the minigun, suppressing enemy positions with devastating effect. The sound was deafening, a mechanical roar that drowned out everything else. "Move! Move! Move!" Jake ordered. His team provided covering fire as they fell back toward the helicopter. Sarah ran alongside them, carrying a medical bag she had grabbed from her truck. Jake went last again, walking backwards and firing to keep the enemy at bay. He reached the helicopter and strong hands pulled him aboard. The bird lifted off immediately, gaining altitude and speed. Tracer rounds chased them into the night sky, but the pilot was skilled, jinking and weaving to avoid the fire. Within seconds, they were out of range, racing toward the safety of the forward operating base. Jake finally allowed himself to breathe. His team was intact. They had survived another impossible situation. He turned his attention to Sarah, who sat on the helicopter floor still clutching her medical bag. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. She looked up at Jake with eyes that had seen too much violence for one night. "Thank you for not leaving me," she said quietly. Jake didn't respond immediately. He studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. All he saw was exhaustion and genuine gratitude. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe she really was just a doctor trying to save children, but even if her story checked out, questions remained. How had enemy forces known about the SEAL operation? Who had set the trap? And why did Sarah's timing seem so impossibly convenient? Jake had a feeling that bringing her back to base was going to create more problems than it solved. He just didn't know how right he was. The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Sharana as the first light of dawn painted the mountains purple and gold. Jake's team climbed out, weapons still hot from the firefight, adrenaline slowly draining from their systems. Sarah stepped out last, looking small and vulnerable, surrounded by armed soldiers and military vehicles. 2 military police officers approached immediately, clearly having been briefed on the unusual passenger. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," one of the MPs said politely but firmly. "Standard security protocol for all unverified personnel." Sarah nodded without resistance. She handed her medical bag to the officer and raised her arms for the search. Jake watched from a distance as they patted her down professionally and confiscated her belongings for inspection. She didn't protest or demand special treatment. She simply cooperated, answering questions in a calm, clear voice. Either she was exactly who she claimed to be, or she was the most skilled operative Jake had ever encountered. "Commander Morrison, Colonel wants to see you immediately," a young lieutenant informed him. "He's in the TOC." The Tactical Operations Center was buzzing with activity. Screens displayed drone feeds. Radio chatter filled the air, and tired officers studied maps and intelligence reports. Colonel Richard stood at the center of it all, a bear of a man with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had been running special operations in Afghanistan for 2 years, and had earned the respect of every operator on the base. "Morrison, what the hell happened out there?" Richards asked without preamble. "Your mission was supposed to be a quick snatch and grab. Instead, I've got reports of explosions, a major firefight, and you bringing back an unverified American civilian. Please tell me there's a good explanation." Jake gave a concise briefing, laying out the timeline of events from the moment they entered the compound to the extraction under fire. He didn't embellish or make excuses. He stuck to facts, though he admitted his uncertainty about Sarah's involvement. "The timing bothers me, sir," Jake concluded. "Everything about this operation felt orchestrated. The intelligence was too good. The ambush was too well prepared. And then Dr. Chen appears at exactly the moment we're most vulnerable." Richard stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Intel is running her credentials now. If she's CIA or another agency running an unauthorized op, we'll know soon. If she's genuine, we'll confirm that too. Either way, she's not going anywhere until we're certain. Good call bringing her in rather than leaving her. Sir, if her story about the refugee camp is true, those children might not have much time," Jake said. "One crisis at a time, Commander. First we figure out who she is and whether she's a security threat. Then we can worry about saving the world." Richards paused, studying Jake's face. "You trust her?" Jake considered the question carefully. "My gut says she's legitimate, but my gut has been wrong before." "Fair enough. Get cleaned up, debriefed, and get some rest. You and your team did good work tonight, even if it didn't go according to plan." Jake left the TOC and headed toward the temporary holding area, where Sarah was being questioned. He didn't have authorization to be there, but nobody stopped him. Through a window, he could see her sitting at a table across from 2 intelligence officers. She was answering questions, occasionally gesturing with her hands to emphasize a point. She looked tired but not scared. Not the behavior of someone with something to hide. Mike approached from behind. "What you thinking, boss?" "Thinking that nothing about tonight makes sense," Jake replied. "We were set up. Someone wanted us in that compound. The question is why. And whether the good doctor is part of the setup or just collateral damage," Mike added. He pulled out a protein bar and offered half to Jake. Intel pulled her background. "She's legit. Dr. Sarah Chen, pediatric surgeon from Seattle, been working with International Medical Relief for 3 years. Multiple deployments to conflict zones. Clean record, no red flags." "That doesn't mean she's not compromised," Jake said, though the information did ease some of his concerns. "Enemy could have grabbed her, turned her, used her credentials as cover." "True, but look at her body language. She's not acting like someone under duress or following a script. She's just answering questions like someone who has nothing to hide." Mike finished his half of the protein bar in 2 bites. "Plus, her story about the convoy checks out. We found the wreckage 20 clicks north of your position. 2 bodies, both locals, shot execution style. Truck was burned out, medical supplies scattered everywhere." That information shifted Jake's assessment significantly. If her convoy had been attacked, if her colleagues were dead, then her sudden appearance made more sense. She had been running for her life and stumbled onto their operation by accident. The timing was just bad luck, not enemy planning. "What about the measles outbreak?" Jake asked, also confirmed. "NGO reports from 2 weeks ago. Mention an outbreak at a refugee camp in the region. They requested medical assistance but couldn't get resources through due to security concerns. The area is considered too dangerous for regular aid operations. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. If Sarah was telling the truth, children were dying while they sat here running security checks. But if they rushed to help and it was a trap, more people would die. Command decisions were never easy, but this one felt particularly heavy. The intelligence officer emerged from the interrogation room and approached Jake and Mike. She's clean. Story checks out on every detail we can verify. Medical credentials are legitimate. Her organization confirms her deployment, and her description of the convoy attack matches what we found at the site. We're clearing her, but she stays on base until we can arrange proper transport back to Kabul. What about the refugee camp? Jake asked. The officer shrugged. Not our problem. We're not a humanitarian mission. She can file a request through proper channels, but that'll take weeks to process. Those kids, if they exist, will have to wait or find help somewhere else. Jake watched through the window as Sarah put her head in her hands, exhausted and defeated. She had risked everything to try to save children, had witnessed her colleagues murdered, had driven through hostile territory in the middle of the night, and now she was being told to wait for bureaucracy to grind through its process. It wasn't right, but it was how things worked in a war zone. Resources were limited, priorities were established, and individual tragedies often got lost in the bigger picture. Mike nudged Jake's shoulder. I know that look. That's your, I'm about to do something that'll probably get me in trouble look. I'm just thinking, Jake replied. Yeah, that's what worries me. The last time you got that look, we ended up extracting a village elder's family through a minefield while taking mortar fire. That worked out fine, Jake said. We lost 2 Humvees and nearly got court-martialed. But the family survived. That's what mattered. Jake turned away from the window. Get the team together. I want to talk to them about something. An hour later, Jake's entire SEAL team sat in their operations room. They were cleaned up, fed, and debriefed, but nobody was sleeping despite the exhaustion. Soldiers in combat zones learned to sleep when they could. But sometimes the mind was too wired, too full of what-ifs and close calls. I'm going to ask something of you that's completely voluntary, Jake began. Dr. Chen's story checks out. There are children dying in a refugee camp about 30 miles from here. She needs medical supplies and security to reach them. Command has essentially told her to wait for official channels, which means those kids will probably die before help arrives. You want us to take her? Mike stated rather than asked. I'm saying it's an option. Unauthorized, unsanctioned, and probably against several regulations. But it's the right thing to do. If anyone wants to sit this out, I'll understand completely. No judgment, no consequences. The team exchanged glances. Jake had served with these men long enough to read their expressions. Danny spoke first. I joined the Navy to save people, Commander. Whether that's killing bad guys or helping sick kids doesn't matter to me. I'm in. One by one, each team member voiced their agreement. Jake felt pride swell in his chest. This was why he loved leading SEALs. They understood that doing the right thing sometimes meant bending the rules. They saw the bigger picture beyond orders and regulations. All right then, Jake said. Let's figure out how we're going to pull this off without getting arrested. Planning an unauthorized humanitarian mission on a military base required creativity and careful timing. Jake knew they couldn't simply requisition vehicles and supplies without raising red flags. They needed to be smart, use resources that wouldn't be immediately missed, and move during a window when their absence might go unnoticed for several hours. Fortunately, the base was large and busy enough that SEALs coming and going on various tasks was normal. Mike had contacts in the supply depot who owed him favors. Within 2 hours, they had assembled a credible collection of basic medical supplies, water purification tablets, and emergency rations. Nothing that would trigger inventory alerts, just items that could plausibly be explained as routine requisitions. Sarah provided a list of critical medications needed for treating measles complications, and Mike worked his magic to acquire them through unofficial channels. The vehicles were trickier. Taking military Humvees would be noticed immediately. Jake decided they would use 2 of the civilian trucks that aid organizations sometimes left on base for maintenance. They weren't armored, and they wouldn't have military markings, which actually worked in their favor. They would blend in better with the local traffic. The biggest challenge was getting Sarah out of the temporary holding area without authorization. She wasn't technically under arrest, but she wasn't free to roam the base either. Jake solved this by exploiting the gap between day and night shifts. The guards changed at 600 hours, and there was always a 15-minute window of confusion as new personnel got briefed and old personnel finished their reports. At 06:10 hours, Jake simply walked into the holding area in full uniform, told Sarah she was being transferred for additional questioning, and escorted her out. Nobody questioned a SEAL officer with command presence and purpose in his stride. They gathered at the motor pool at 06:30 hours. The sun was fully up now, and the base was shifting into its daily rhythm. Soldiers grabbed breakfast, officers attended morning briefings, and various units prepared for their missions. Jake's team looked like just another group of operators heading out for a routine patrol. They loaded the trucks quickly and efficiently, keeping their heads down and their movements purposeful. Sarah climbed into the lead truck beside Jake. She had been given desert camouflage utilities that almost fit her, and someone had found her a protective vest. She looked more like a soldier now, which would help them blend in during the journey. Her medical bag sat at her feet, packed with the supplies Mike had acquired. "I can't believe you're doing this," Sarah said as Jake started the engine. "You could get in serious trouble." "Probably will," Jake replied, steering the truck toward the main gate. "But my team and I didn't join the military just to follow orders blindly. We joined to make a difference. Sometimes that means improvising." The guards at the gate checked their identification and waved them through without much scrutiny. Jake had filed a fake patrol route that would take them in the general direction of the refugee camp. It wouldn't hold up under detailed examination, but it would buy them a few hours before anyone started asking questions. They drove through the Afghan countryside, keeping to back roads and avoiding major checkpoints. The landscape was harsh but beautiful in its own way. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still covered in snow. Villages appeared occasionally, clusters of mud brick buildings that had stood for centuries. Children waved at them from roadside, and Jake waved back, wondering if any of them would be helped by what they were about to do. Sarah navigated using a combination of GPS coordinates and her memory of the area. She had been to the refugee camp once before, 3 months ago, as part of a preliminary assessment team. The camp had grown significantly since then, she explained. Families fleeing violence in neighboring provinces had swelled its population from a few hundred to over 2,000 people. Resources were scarce, sanitation was poor, and disease spread quickly in those conditions. The measles outbreak started about 3 weeks ago, Sarah explained as they bounced along a rough dirt road. At first, it was just a few cases. The camp administrators tried to quarantine the sick children, but with so many people living in close quarters, containment was impossible. Last I heard, before my convoy was attacked, over 50 children were showing symptoms. The mortality rate for untreated measles in conditions like this can be as high as 10%. That means 5 children dead, maybe more by now. Jake absorbed this information silently. He had seen death many times in his career. He had seen enemy combatants fall, had watched brothers in arms pay the ultimate price, had witnessed civilian casualties caught in crossfire, but there was something particularly cruel about children dying from preventable diseases. In America, measles was a footnote in medical textbooks. Here, it was a killer. They passed through a small village where local elders sat outside a tea shop, watching their vehicles with suspicious eyes. This was Taliban territory, though the lines were always blurry in Afghanistan. A village could be friendly in the morning and hostile by evening, depending on who had visited and what pressures had been applied. Jake kept his rifle ready but not threatening, showing alertness without aggression. Mike's voice crackled over the radio from the second truck. "Commander, we've got a vehicle approaching fast from behind. Single truck, moving with purpose." Jake checked his mirror and saw the dust trail. His hand moved to his weapon instinctively. This could be nothing, just a local driver in a hurry. Or it could be the beginning of an ambush. His team had been lucky once already this deployment. Luck had a way of running out. Maintain speed and spacing. Keep weapons ready but concealed. "Let's see what they want," Jake ordered. The truck behind them accelerated, closing the distance rapidly. It was a Toyota pickup common in the region, with 3 men visible in the cab. Jake's muscles tensed. This felt wrong. The truck was moving too aggressively, too confidently. These men weren't civilians going about their business. They're not slowing down, Sarah observed, her voice tight with worry. "I see them," Jake replied, calculating options. If this was a hostile force, they were in a bad position. No armor, no air support, limited ammunition. If they had to fight, it would be ugly. The pickup pulled alongside them, and for a tense moment Jake expected gunfire. His finger rested on his rifle, ready to engage. But instead of shooting, the driver gestured frantically, pointing ahead down the road and shouting something in Pashto. The men in the truck looked worried, not aggressive. "What are they saying?" Jake asked Sarah. "I don't speak Pashto fluently, but I think they're trying to warn us about something ahead," Sarah replied, straining to hear over the engine noise. The pickup suddenly accelerated past them and disappeared around a bend in the road. Jake eased off the gas pedal, his instincts screaming caution. A warning from locals could mean anything from a roadblock to an IED. Either way, charging ahead blindly would be suicide. Echo 2, hold position. "I'm moving forward on foot to recon the road," Jake said into his radio. He stopped the truck and grabbed his rifle. Mike and Danny joined him, leaving the others to provide security on the vehicles and protect Sarah. The 3 SEALs moved forward carefully, using the terrain for cover, scanning for threats. They rounded the bend in the road and immediately saw the problem. A bridge crossing a dry riverbed had partially collapsed. The concrete structure had been damaged, probably by an IED weeks or months ago, and never repaired. A civilian truck had tried to cross anyway and was now tilted at a dangerous angle, its rear wheels hanging over empty air. A family stood nearby, the father arguing with another man about how to rescue the vehicle. But that wasn't what made Jake's blood run cold. On the far side of the collapsed bridge, a group of armed men had established a checkpoint. They wore a mix of military and civilian clothing, carried AK-47s, and had the casual confidence of people who controlled the area. Taliban, or one of the other militant groups that operated in the region. Either way, they were between Jake's team and the refugee camp. "We've got a problem," Mike muttered. Jake studied the situation through his rifle scope. The militants hadn't noticed them yet, focused on extracting money or goods from travelers trying to cross the bridge. But the moment Jake's team appeared, especially with Americans clearly visible, the situation would turn violent. They were outnumbered and outgunned if it came to a firefight, and Sarah would be caught in the middle. "We could backtrack, find another route," Danny suggested. "That could add hours to the journey." "Those kids might not have hours," Jake replied. He was thinking, calculating, weighing risks against rewards. There had to be a way through this that didn't end in bloodshed. Then Jake noticed something. The pickup truck that had warned them was parked near the militants, and the driver was talking to one of the armed men. The conversation looked friendly, almost casual. A local with connections to the fighters, maybe even family ties. An idea formed in Jake's mind, risky but possibly workable. "I'm going to try something," Jake said. "Might be the stupidest thing I've ever done, or it might just save all our lives." Jake walked back to the vehicles where Sarah waited anxiously. His team watched him with questions in their eyes, waiting for orders that would determine whether they fought their way through or found another path. Jake had learned long ago that the best warriors knew when to fight and when to use other tools. Sometimes talking prevented more death than shooting ever could. "Dr. Chen, I need you to trust me on something," Jake said. "We're going to drive up to that checkpoint and you're going to do all the talking. You're a doctor on a humanitarian mission to help sick children. You have local drivers and security. That's the story. My team and I will be your hired protection. Nothing more. Can you sell that?" Sarah's eyes widened. "You want to pretend we're not military? They'll see right through that. Your gear, your weapons, your whole demeanor screams special forces." "Which is exactly why it might work," Mike interjected, understanding Jake's plan. "Lots of private security contractors work in Afghanistan. We remove our military patches, keep our weapons visible but not threatening, and let the doctor do the talking." "We're just hired guns escorting a medical mission," Jake nodded. "These fighters see military convoys all the time. They know attacking Americans brings hellfire down on their heads. But aid workers? They sometimes let them pass, especially if there's no profit in stopping them. Our best chance is to appeal to whatever humanity they have left." The team quickly stripped off any identifying military patches and insignia. They kept their weapons and tactical gear because removing those would look suspicious. Private contractors were known for having quality equipment. They had to walk a careful line between looking professional, enough to be believable, and not so military that they triggered an automatic hostile response. Sarah took a deep breath and climbed back into the passenger seat. Her hands trembled slightly as she buckled her seatbelt. If this goes wrong, if they figure out who you really are, they'll execute all of us on camera and post it online for propaganda. Then we better make sure they believe the story, Jake replied, starting the engine. He keyed his radio. Everyone stays calm, weapons down but ready. We're humanitarian workers until the situation says otherwise. Echo 2, if shooting starts, suppress and displace back the way we came. Don't try to be heroes. The two trucks rolled forward slowly, deliberately non-threatening in their approach. Jake could see the militants at the checkpoint notice them now, weapons rising instinctively. He kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, showing he wasn't reaching for a weapon. The militants formed a loose line across the damaged bridge, creating a barrier that couldn't be passed without their permission. Jake stopped the truck 30 feet from the checkpoint. The leader of the group, a man with a thick beard and a distinctive scar across his cheek, walked forward with two others flanking him. He carried his AK-47 casually, like it was an extension of his arm. His eyes were hard and calculating as he studied the trucks and their occupants. Sarah opened her door and stepped out before Jake could stop her. She walked toward the militants with her hands slightly raised, palms open, showing she was unarmed. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. This woman had more courage than sense. The militants could shoot her where she stood, and there would be nothing he could do fast enough to save her. Assalamu alaikum, Sarah called out in Arabic, the traditional greeting of peace. My name is Dr. Sarah Chin. I am a doctor with International Medical Relief. I am traveling to the refugee camp east of here to treat sick children. These men are my security. We mean no harm to anyone. The scarred leader studied her for a long moment. He said something in Pashto to his men and one of them laughed. Jake's hand moved closer to his rifle. The situation could turn violent in a heartbeat. But then the leader spoke in accented but clear English. You are American doctor? He asked. Yes, from Seattle, Washington, Sarah replied. I've been working in Afghanistan for 3 years helping people who need medical care. And these men with guns? They are also helpers? The leader's tone was mocking but not immediately hostile. They protect me so I can do my work. The roads are dangerous. Surely you understand the need for protection in these times. The leader walked past Sarah and approached Jake's truck. Jake kept his face neutral, betraying no emotion. The militant peered through the window, studying Jake's face, his gear, his weapons. Jake stared straight ahead, not making eye contact, not showing challenge or fear. Just a professional doing a job. You are soldier, the leader stated flatly. It wasn't a question, I was, Jake replied carefully. Now I work private security. Better pay, fewer rules. The leader smiled, showing missing teeth. You kill many of my brothers, I think. In Helmand, in Kandahar, in many places. American special forces leave blood wherever they go. The war has been hard on everyone, Jake said neutrally. I'm just trying to make a living now. The doctor pays well for protection. The militant leader walked to the back of the truck and gestured for it to be opened. Danny complied, lowering the tailgate to reveal the medical supplies and humanitarian aid. The leader poked through the boxes, reading labels, examining contents. He pulled out a package of antibiotics and held it up. My daughter is sick, he said suddenly. Fever, cough, very weak. Local doctor has no medicine. You have medicine for her? Sarah immediately moved to the truck. What are her symptoms? How long has she been sick? The leader described his daughter's condition in detail, and Sarah listened intently. Jake realized this was the moment that would determine their fate. If Sarah could help this man's child, they might pass through unharmed. If not, or if the man thought she was lying, things would get bad quickly. It sounds like she might have pneumonia, Sarah said. Bacterial infection in the lungs. Very dangerous if untreated, especially in children, but treatable with the right antibiotics. She selected several bottles from their supplies and handed them to the leader. Give her these twice a day with food. She should start improving within 2 days. If she gets worse, she needs to go to a hospital immediately. The leader held the medicine like it was made of gold. His hard expression softened slightly, and Jake saw a glimpse of the father beneath the fighter. You give this freely? You do not ask for money? I'm a doctor. My job is to heal people, not profit from suffering, Sarah replied. Your daughter needs that medicine. Take it. The militant leader turned to his men and spoke rapidly in Pashto. They lowered their weapons and stepped aside, clearing the path across the damaged bridge. The leader turned back to Sarah and Jake. The bridge is not safe for heavy vehicles. You must cross slowly, very slowly on the left side where concrete is still strong. After bridge road splits, Take right path. It will bring you to camp in 1 hour. Left path goes to Taliban training area. You do not want to go there. Thank you, Sarah said. I hope your daughter recovers quickly. The leader nodded once and stepped back. Jake put the truck in gear and began the careful crossing of the damaged bridge. Every meter felt like a mile. The concrete groaned under the weight of the vehicle, and Jake could see gaps where rebar was exposed. One wrong move and they would plunge into the dry riverbed below. They made it across with both trucks intact. As they drove away from the checkpoint, Jake watched in his mirror as the militants returned to their positions. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool morning air. That had been one of the most terrifying experiences of his career, and not a single shot had been fired. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen anyone do, Jake told Sarah once they were safely away from the checkpoint. Sometimes bravery and foolishness look the same, Sarah replied. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. But did you see his face when I gave him the medicine? For just a moment he wasn't a fighter. He was just a father worried about his child. That's the part of humanity we forget exists in places like this. Mike's voice came over the radio. Commander, I don't know what just happened back there, but remind me never to doubt your crazy plans again. Jake allowed himself a small smile. They had passed through an impossible situation without violence. They had used compassion as a weapon and found it more effective than bullets. But the mission wasn't over yet. The refugee camp was still ahead, and with it, the children Sarah had been trying so desperately to reach. The road climbed into foothills, and after 45 minutes of careful driving, they crested a rise and saw the camp spread out in the valley below. It was larger than Jake had imagined, a sprawling city of tents and makeshift shelters housing thousands of displaced people. Smoke from cooking fires created a haze over the area. Even from a distance, Jake could see the desperation in how people moved, the exhaustion in how they sat, the defeat in how they waited for a future that might never come. There, Sarah said, pointing to a cluster of white tents in the center of the camp. That's the medical area, or what passes for one. Last I heard, they had 2 nurses and almost no supplies serving over 2,000 people. As they drove down into the valley, children began running toward the trucks, shouting excitedly. Adults emerged from tents, some waving, others watching cautiously. Jake's team remained alert, scanning for threats, but what they saw was mainly hope in the faces of people who had very little reason to hope anymore. They parked near the medical tents, and immediately they were surrounded by people calling out in multiple languages, asking for help, for food, for news from the outside world. Sarah jumped from the truck and was immediately embraced by a thin woman in a headscarf, who spoke rapidly in Dari. Sarah responded in the same language, and Jake realized she had more skills than she had revealed during their brief acquaintance. An elderly man who appeared to be the camp elder approached Jake. He spoke in broken English. You bring doctor? You bring medicine? Many children are very sick. We pray for help. Allah has answered. The doctor is here to help, Jake confirmed. We have medical supplies. Show us where the sick children are. What Jake saw in the medical tent would stay with him forever. Dozens of children lay on mats on the ground, their small bodies racked with fever and covered in the telltale rash of measles. Mothers sat beside them, fanning them with pieces of cardboard, whispering prayers, holding tiny hands. The air was thick with the smell of sickness and despair. Some children were too weak to even cry. Sarah immediately went to work, moving from child to child with practiced efficiency. She assessed conditions, issued orders to the overwhelmed nurses, and began organizing treatment. Jake's team helped unload the medical supplies, and suddenly the SEALs who were trained for war found themselves in a different kind of battle. They held children so Sarah could examine them. They mixed medications following her precise instructions. They comforted mothers who spoke no English, but whose fear and love transcended language barriers. Hours passed in a blur of medical emergency. Sarah worked tirelessly, treating the sickest children first, stabilizing conditions, administering medications that would fight infections and reduce fevers. Jake watched her transform from a scared civilian in a helicopter to a confident professional commanding a chaotic medical situation with skill and authority. This was her battlefield, and she was every bit the warrior his team was in their own domain. By late afternoon, Sarah had treated 43 children, and the crisis was beginning to stabilize. The medications were working, fevers were dropping, and the most critical cases had been pulled back from the edge. Jake sat outside the medical tent, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Watching children suffer, seeing mothers cry with relief when their babies showed signs of improvement, had drained something from him that combat never touched. Danny approached with bottles of water. "We're going to have a problem, Commander. Radio chatter says the base is looking for us. Colonel Richards is not happy. They figured out we took the civilian trucks and went off mission." Jake had known this was coming. The moment they left the base without authorization, the clock started ticking on consequences. Court-martial, demotion, dishonorable discharge, all possible outcomes. But looking at the children who were now sleeping peacefully instead of dying in agony, Jake couldn't bring himself to regret the decision. "How much time do we have before they send someone to collect us?" Jake asked. "Best guess? 2 hours, maybe 3. They're trying to track our position using satellite and signal intelligence. Once they pinpoint us, they'll send a recovery team." Jake nodded. 2 hours was enough time for Sarah to finish stabilizing her patients and provide instructions to the local medical staff. After that, they would face whatever consequences awaited them. His career was probably over and his team would suffer for following him. But some things were worth the cost. Sarah emerged from the medical tent, her face exhausted but satisfied. She sat down beside Jake and accepted a bottle of water gratefully. "I think we saved them all. Every single child is going to survive. The medications you helped me get, they made all the difference." "You're the one who saved them," Jake replied. "We just provided transportation and security. Don't diminish what you did. You risked everything to help children you don't know, in a country thousands of miles from home. That's heroism in its purest form." Sarah took a long drink of water. "I overheard your man talking about radio chatter. You're in trouble because of me. We're in trouble because we made a choice. A good choice. I'll stand by it no matter what happens." The camp elder approached again, this time with several other elders from the community. They carried plates of food, simple rice and vegetables, but offered with genuine hospitality. Through a translator, they expressed gratitude that went beyond words. These were people who had lost homes, family members, and futures to endless war. But they still found the capacity to thank strangers who showed them kindness. Jake and his team shared the meal with the refugees, sitting in a circle, breaking bread with former enemies and current victims of circumstances beyond their control. In that moment, the lines between soldier and civilian, American and Afghan, friend and foe, all blurred into simple humanity. They were just people sharing food and stories in the fading afternoon light. Mike sat next to Jake and spoke quietly. "You know this changes nothing, right? Tomorrow we'll still be at war. These people will still be refugees. The Taliban will still control the roads. One good deed doesn't fix Afghanistan." "I know," Jake replied. "But it fixes something. For these 43 children and their families, the world is different today than it was yesterday. That has to count for something." A child, maybe 6 years old, approached shyly and offered Jake a small carved wooden camel. The toy was rough and simple, clearly made by hand from scrap wood. The child said something in Dari and ran back to his mother, who smiled and nodded encouragement. The translator explained. "He says you are a good man. He wants you to remember him when you go home to America. The camel will remind you that even in the desert, life finds a way." Jake held the small wooden toy carefully, feeling its weight in his hand. It was worth nothing in monetary terms, but everything in meaning. He tucked it into his pocket, a reminder of why he wore the uniform and took the oath. Not for politics or oil or strategic interests, but for moments like this when being a soldier meant being a protector of the vulnerable. The sound of helicopter rotors interrupted the peaceful moment. 3 Blackhawks appeared over the ridge, flying in formation, making no attempt at stealth. They were coming for Jake and his team, and they were making it clear that this was official business. The refugees scattered nervously at the sight and sound of military helicopters. Too many of them had experienced what it meant when helicopters arrived unannounced. The lead helicopter landed in a clear area outside the camp, rotor wash kicking up dust and debris. Colonel Richards emerged, followed by armed military police. His face was unreadable as he strode toward Jake's position. Jake stood and came to attention, knowing that whatever happened next would determine not just his future, but the futures of everyone who had followed him on this unauthorized mission. "Commander Morrison," Richards said formally, "you and your team are ordered to return to base immediately. Dr. Chen is to accompany us as well. You are all facing serious charges for unauthorized use of military resources, leaving base without proper authorization, and conducting operations outside your mission parameters. Yes, sir. I take full responsibility for the decision. My team was following my orders, Jake replied. I'm sure you do, and will sort out responsibility during the investigation. Richards looked past Jake to the medical tent where children were sleeping peacefully. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. How many, sir? How many children did you save today, Commander? 43, sir. Dr. Chen treated 43 children who would have died without intervention. Richards was silent for a long moment. He walked to the medical tent and looked inside, seeing the sleeping children, the grateful mothers, the exhausted nurses who had been working beyond their limits. He returned to Jake and spoke in a voice low enough that only Jake could hear. What you did was reckless, insubordinate, and violated about a dozen regulations. It was also the most important thing any soldier under my command has done in 6 months. I'm going to have to discipline you because that's how the system works. But off the record, I'm proud of you. You remembered why we're really here. Jake felt relief wash over him, though he knew the consequences would still be real. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. You're still facing a mountain of paperwork and probably a demotion, but you'll keep your career if I have anything to say about it. Richards raised his voice so everyone could hear. Load up, we're heading back to base. And somebody get those medical supplies properly documented. Apparently, we just completed a successful humanitarian operation in cooperation with International Medical Relief. All properly authorized, of course. Sarah caught Jake's eye and smiled. Richards was covering for them, bending the narrative to protect his people while still maintaining military order. It was the kind of leadership that inspired loyalty and made good soldiers willing to follow orders even into uncertainty. The flight back to base was quieter than the desperate journey that morning. Jake's team was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained from the intensity of the past 24 hours. They had gone from a failed combat operation to a successful humanitarian mission, facing death and saving lives in equal measure. Sarah sat across from Jake in the helicopter, her medical bag empty now, her mission accomplished. What will you do now? Jake asked her over the sound of the rotors. File my report, request new supplies, and probably head back out to another crisis in another camp. The work never ends out here. There's always someone who needs help. She paused. What about you? Are you really in serious trouble? Probably. But I've been in trouble before. I'll survive. Jake looked out the helicopter window at the Afghan landscape passing below. Thank you for reminding me why I do this job. It's easy to forget in the middle of combat operations and kill or be killed situations. Sometimes we need to remember that protecting people is the whole point. The helicopter touched down at the base as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Jake and his team were immediately separated for individual debriefings and formal statements. The process would take days, maybe weeks, to fully resolve. But Jake wasn't worried about his career anymore. He had made peace with whatever consequences came his way. 3 weeks later, Jake received official notification of his reprimand. He was formally censured for unauthorized use of resources and given additional duties as punishment. It would go in his permanent record, a black mark that would affect future promotions. But he wasn't court-martialed, wasn't discharged, and his team received minimal punishment after investigators concluded they were following orders from their commanding officer. More importantly, Jake received a letter from Sarah. She had returned to the refugee camp twice more, bringing additional medical teams and supplies. The measles outbreak was fully contained. All 43 children had recovered completely. The camp had established better sanitation procedures and disease prevention protocols. She included a photograph of the children, healthy and smiling, waving at the camera. On the back, she had written, "Sometimes breaking the rules is the most important rule of all. Thank you for being brave enough to see past protocol to humanity." Jake kept the photograph on his desk, next to the small wooden camel the child had given him. His team continued their missions, conducting operations throughout Afghanistan, facing danger with skill and courage. But something had changed in them all. They carried with them the memory of a day when they put down their weapons and picked up medicine, when they chose compassion over protocol, when they remembered that being a warrior sometimes meant protecting life rather than taking it. Years later, after Jake had retired from the Navy and returned to civilian life, He would tell the story to anyone who asked about his service. Not the battles he won or the enemies he defeated, but the day he and his team went unauthorized into hostile territory to save children from disease. It was the mission he was most proud of, the one that defined his career more than any medal or commendation ever could. Sarah continued her humanitarian work, eventually founding her own medical organization focused on bringing healthcare to conflict zones. She and Jake stayed in touch, comparing notes on their respective battles against suffering and injustice. She sent him updates on the refugee camp, which slowly transformed from a desperate shelter into a more stable community with proper medical facilities. The wooden camel sat on Jake's mantle in his home, a reminder that even in the darkest places, even in the middle of war and chaos, humanity could triumph. It reminded him that sometimes the most important decision a soldier makes has nothing to do with tactics or weapons, but everything to do with recognizing that the enemy of suffering is everyone's responsibility, regardless of uniform or nationality. Mike, Danny, and the rest of the team went on to distinguished careers, though they all agreed that the unauthorized humanitarian mission remained their most memorable operation. They had faced enemy fire countless times, but nothing tested them quite like watching children fight for their lives and knowing they had the power to help. The story of the SEALs who lowered their guns and walked into danger to save children became something of a legend within the special operations community. It was told in training courses as an example of leadership, moral courage, and the importance of remembering the human dimension of warfare. It reminded young soldiers that wearing the uniform meant more than following orders. It meant making hard choices, standing up for what was right, and sometimes breaking rules for the right reasons. Jake never regretted the decision, not for a single moment. When people asked if he would do it again, knowing the consequences, he always answered the same way. Every single time. Because some missions are more important than careers, some lives are more valuable than regulations, and some moments define what it truly means to be a warrior. The day he lowered his weapon and chose to save rather than destroy was the day he became the soldier he had always wanted to be.